Former CIA Deputy Director and CBS News Senior Security Contributor Michael Morell is here. Michael, thanks for being with us. I think first I want to ask you about the kinds of targets that were chosen by these terrorists. Is the thinking now that ISIS views any Western city, Western capital, the streets of a Western city as a combat zone, and civilians are ripe targets?
I think the choice of targets here is very worrisome. Al-Qaeda went after large symbolic targets. Some of what ISIS has done in the Middle East and some of what has inspired have been against targets that people don't sympathize with but understand, right? Charlie Hebdo criticizing the Prophet, government targets, military training facilities in the United States, for example. People kind of understand those targets. These targets in Paris were attacks on the way we live, right, and the way we carry out our daily lives. So designed to sow much more fear, right, and terror than the traditional targets. Don't know whether this is part of their strategy, but if it is, it's very, very worrisome.
Michael, the president, right before these horrendous attacks, seemed to say that ISIS was contained. Now, perhaps he was talking about on the battlefield, yeah. But is it time, perhaps, for the administration to go back and say to the American people, look, the last 4 years, we probably made a mistake. We should have taken this on head-on early as opposed to where we are now, but we have to rethink our strategy, yeah. And perhaps even talk to President Bashar al-Assad about ways to work with him to get rid of this problem.
Yeah, let me do two things here. One is talk about the president's a statement on containment, right? I don't want to try to get in his head. I don't know why he said it, but you can look at ISIS from many different perspectives, right? One perspective is as an insurgent group, right? Trying to gain territory in Iraq and Syria. From that perspective, they absolutely have been contained, right? They've actually lost territory in the last year. But from the perspective of an international terrorist group and as a revolutionary political movement, they've actually gained significantly in the last year. They have not been contained from that perspective. So that's how I look at that. I do think that when you look at the downing of that Russian airliner, right, only the third airliner down by a bomb in a quarter century, and you look at the attack in Paris, the largest terrorist attack in Western Europe since the Madrid bombings in 2004, the first ISIS-directed attack in the West. When you look at those two things, you have to conclude that our strategy is simply not working, and it's time. I don't have the answer to what the strategy should be, but it's time to look at every aspect of our defense against ISIS and our offense against ISIS and ask, how can we make it work better?
Oh, so based on what you just said, Mike, that the policy is not working, how confident are you, our intelligence officials, that they know this enemy well enough at this point, based on what they've seen with all the cases that you just mentioned, as well as Paris, that they will be in a position to advise policymakers on a strategy that will work?
Yeah, so I do think we understand the enemy. One of the most important things to understand about the enemy here is what are their ultimate objectives.
Right, what is their end game?
And we understand that, right? It is not just to have a caliphate in Iraq and Syria. It is to have a global caliphate, including here in the United States, right, where we all live under their extreme religious doctrine. That is their goal. It is not just in the Middle East, it is everywhere. I think what we need is better intelligence on what's actually happening on the ground in Iraq and Syria and where the leadership is so that we can much better target them and take them off the battlefield in rapid succession. One every couple of months is not enough to degrade the organization. You need one or two a week.
But the battlefield is here now, isn't it?
That's part of the battlefield now, absolutely.
Michael, the French have already begun airstrikes on ISIS. The United States has been conducting airstrikes in Syria and Iraq. But the question I think a lot of people are going to have right now, given what we've seen over the weekend, perhaps a real boots-on-the-ground strategy will also be needed. And that is a tough discussion with the American people who've been at war since 9/11. But I think people, when they see what happened in France, you think it would be a hard sell to the American people to say, look, the only way we're going to wrap these guys up is if we put some boots on the ground. These pinpoint strikes are not going to work over the long term. We'll be fighting them again in 5 years. Is that a strategy that the president should have on his table?
So I think it has to be discussed, just like everything has to be discussed. Where I would tend to end up is let's put a lot more special forces on the ground in Iraq and Syria to support those people who are doing the fighting, and let's move our special forces much closer to the battlefield where they can provide more effective advice and assistance, and where they can see what's happening on the battlefield and call in airstrikes to support the battle. That's what I would like to see. We'll see where we end up.
Michael, before I let you go, can we count on some of the Arab partners in the region, Saudi Arabia, Jordan? Can they get involved in this? Because it seems, for the most part, they are at least visibly on the sidelines. Perhaps behind the scenes things are happening, but for Americans, we don't see these guys.
Yeah. So they were very active early on. There's been a reduction in their activity because they've been focused on what's going on in Yemen and the war they're fighting there against the Houthis and the Iranians. They do need to be more active. They, in fact, need to be the leaders here on the battlefield, I believe.
And do you believe that it is only a matter of time before a Paris-style attack happens here in the U.S.?
Unless we degrade them, yes.
Michael Morell, thank you so much.
Good to be with you.